So the trailer for Assassin's Creed Shadows, formerly known as Codename Red, dropped today, and it looks awesome. But predictably, certain corners of the internet are not happy. The game features two protagonists, the Japanese shinobi Naoe and African samurai Yasuke. I'll let you guess which one people are annoyed about. Now, to be fair, Yasuke is an interesting choice for this game because he's the first protagonist that's actually based on a historical person. So Yasuke was an African slave that was brought to Japan by an Italian who then came into the service of Oda Nobunaga, a Japanese lord. Now, in reality, he was essentially a servant or weapon bearer, but as they often like to do with the Assassin's Creed games, they're taking some liberties and artistic license and embellishing on the real story. So keep it in mind that at the start of every Assassin's Creed game, it always says, inspired by historical events. They are, at the end of the day, historical fiction games. They use historical events, locations, and people as a basis to tell a fictional story, which I thought we were all on board with. I thought we all understood that that was how these games worked by now, but apparently not. Because as soon as this trailer released, you had lots of people on Twitter going, Yasuke wasn't really a samurai, he was a servant, he was a slave. And it's like, bro, we know it's a fucking game. It's not real. These games have a race of super powerful, godlike ancient beings and people that jump into haystacks from like 20 stories in the air. Now, that aside, nobody seems to mind when we take a white historical character like William Adams and make him fight demons and all kinds of crazy stuff. Nobody seems to mind that his game, Neo, isn't a fully accurate depiction of his life. Nobody seems to mind that we can have a fictional character like Jonathan Blackthorne be based on William Adams and Shogun have a fictionalized version of history. People were generally fine with Nathan Algren being an Americanized fictional version of Jules Brenet and Eugene Kalash. You know, two white French guys whose lives did inspire what we saw in The Last Samurai, but again, that movie was fictionalized, embellished on, not accurate. They just took something that happened in history and then, you know, made a cool fictional story out of it. And it's totally fine to do that for those three people who are white, but not Yasuke. If they're going to adapt Yasuke, he has to be a slave. He has to be portrayed with 100% historical accuracy. Now, why is that? Why is it that people are adamant that just because he was a servant or slave in real life, he has to be portrayed that way in a game? They're perfectly happy to change or embellish or romanticize the lives of white historical characters. I'm going to be 100% honest, I sometimes think it's a bit silly when they race swap historical characters, like, you know, making Cleopatra black or making Anne Boleyn black. I even talked about that on Twitter at the time. I said rather than making Anne Boleyn black, for example, they should have done a story about an actual African black woman. Portray real history. If you're going to make a documentary, portray real black and African history rather than, you know, doing silly race swaps. But Yasuke was a real person, and this is a fictional game. It's not a documentary. It's fine to make embellishments for fun. Context is really important depending on whether you're trying to go for realism in terms of making a documentary or docudrama and just making a game. And if it's just a game that's clearly meant to be historical fiction, it's not that deep, especially when you put a disclaimer at the start saying what it is. You know, maybe this will make people look up the actual story of the real Yasuke and find it really interesting. So if Yasuke being depicted as a samurai in a fictional game really does bother you that much, after all the things I've just talked about with these other characters and how it's okay to embellish them, and how it's clearly stated that this is just fiction, the only remaining factor that you can be annoyed about is the colour of his skin. And if you're just a history nerd that gets frustrated with all adaptations that aren't 100% accurate, then you wouldn't be playing these games in the first place because they wouldn't be for you. Rant over.